to get the speakers from today that will be participating in the panel, more or less gather up at the front. Including the person who gave me the tour. He's no longer there. But you know, he said, "Well, this is where we used to make photographic papers, and just a big field, because they had to tear down these buildings. They couldn't leave them just open." So, it really, to me, it kind of begs the question: how much longer can we go? The strategies, the techniques, the talents, the connoisseurship, the materials. How much gas is left in the tank? How sustainable are basically, you know, all of the presentations today were so film dependent. How far can we push that dependency on film? Doug? No.
All I can say is, as long as there's product available, we intend to commit to film. I mean, our primary aim at our lab is film. We're not a digital facility. We don't do digital restoration. We're a preservation laboratory. There's a big difference between preservation and restoration. You know, we're not modifying images digitally and fixing them. We're saving them as they exist. And I don't really see, you know, we have a number of manufacturers. We have Fuji, we have Orwo is making a range of films which is potentially usable. And we have Kodak. And even if Kodak, I've said, you know, maybe it won't be called Kodak anymore. I don't know if anyone remembers, I think it was back in the 70s, we always took our film to the drugstore and had Kodak process it. That was the thing to do, and I really like to use Kodak. They always did a really good job. And then they spun it off. They spun off the whole photo finishing, including the movie film, the reversal processing, the ECO processing, and the E6, and all of that spun off to Kodalux. I don't know if anyone remembers Kodalux. And I don't know what those machinations were, but that's what happened. And the quality was still good, you know. And finally, I think they ended it all. But I'm sure that if there's a demand, you know, if we don't jump ship. Someone's going to make film for us to do this. You know, it's just a much lower volume is the problem, and when you have low volumes, you know, the price is gonna, the cost of the materials is gonna go up. There's absolutely no doubt about it. You know.
For the LVTs that we showed that Doug did for Smithson, that film, that's E100G a couple months ago, Kodak discontinued that film. It's gone.
Something happened on the way to this conference.
Yeah. So I called up Doug. He had called B&H and bought everything they had, and now he has to switch to Fuji color. So we still have an option, but it's shrinking. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the only reason we have this film is motion picture theaters have not gone digital yet, but they're slated to, so that's the whole. You want to talk about that?
Well, no, I just want to throw in behind that. I mean, the person who was giving me this tour at Kodak basically said that once motion picture films stop distributing on film, the economies of scale just won't work anymore. And that's when Kodak will finally be out of business when it comes to manufacturing, selling film. Now, I don't know if that's true or that's part of the hysteria that, Janice, you were referring to.
I think it's true as far as the current physical plant goes. You know, the plant is designed to generate mass amounts of material, and it's a changing landscape, and it has to be re-geared to lower volumes, and these duplication films you're talking about are in no way that I know of related to motion picture film, the ones that you were presenting. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I certainly can relate to as a film lab there that, and having a film lab processing up that we processed almost every type of film that was made and had 3 floors of our building dedicated for processing. And our structure was set up to do high volume processing. And when the economy of scale started shrinking down of the amount of volume, we couldn't sustain an operation built to do 1 million feet of film for 100, for 10,000 feet of film. It just didn't work. But on the other side is that when this, so if you have a smaller operation, it becomes more economical. I'll relate to a different technology, and it certainly relates to vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes, when the world of solid state came out and they're making vacuum tubes with TVs and radios, and everything was on the planet vacuum tubes, and then, whatever, and 25 years ago, they stopped making vacuum tubes. There was still a business, and it was from the collectors and the hobbyists and the audio people saying, we need vacuum tubes for our audio amplifiers and guitar amplifiers. What they do, the Russians got involved in making vacuum tubes, the Chinese got involved in making vacuum tubes. They cost more than what they did when they were made 25 years ago, but they're still available. And film may wind up being that type of medium. I mean, it'd be Kodak, somebody will pick it up if there's enough volume to start a film.
Stockpile, that's what we're doing, and that's what the Tate's doing, really, is get it on film and get as much of it on film as you can get. So for some projects, I'll figure out how many we use per year, and then for Smithson we did, and then ordered another 50 sets or so to stockpile and put in a freezer.
We're just going to comment, and the strategy for stockpiling, at least it was my experience in talking with people that I used to know at Kodak, that if you're stockpiling, I would strongly suggest you try to do it in a fairly regular way so that you're buying it in a periodic way that seems like people are buying it. Buying it like once a year.
So we can keep Kodak alive? So we can keep Kodak alive? What do you mean?
It's just that if you're stockpiling, I mean, it's just that they're looking at
Numbers. They're looking at numbers.
purchase regularly, purchase often.
Sylvie, do you have a microphone?
On this line of stockpiling, is there a decision that has been made from the curatorial point of view when you get requests to show this work? Have you, like, okay, now we have 50 sets which correspond to X months of exhibition, and we need this X months to last us for, I don't know, 10 years or, whatever. Are you starting to say no to people that want to
No.
exhibit? Yeah.
No, I don't think that should be our job. I think our job is to make it happen, For something like Sharon's piece, that's a hard piece to stockpile. I mean, it's just insane amounts of slides. But it's something, if we want to be able to show that piece, we have to do. And it's expensive. I think part of acquiring slide pieces now is for the museum to really understand the cost associated with that, and it's not small.
But eventually will come the day that there will not be film. Do we agree on that?
I think so.
So we'll have to switch, to transfer to some other format to show this, but you will have used all the films that exist. So I mean, you understand the...
No, I totally agree with the premise of this question. I mean, I'd be kind of curious, show of hands, for the panel, 10 years out, will you still be able to get film to more or less do what you're doing today, more or less implement the preservation strategies that we were talking about today? Can you do it in 10 years? So I honestly want to see shows. Do you think?
Well, I think,
yes.
I think there may be
Yes.
a difference between still films and motion picture films.
Well, okay.
I mean, I would certainly say less than 10 years for still photography.
Less than 10 years for still.
Yes.
And motion picture cannot be far behind that. Do you think?
I'm not going to comment on
Don't
that.
know. Okay. I'm not the big expert here. So
I would say yes, because
You would say
there's
yes.
a vested interest in Hollywood to do preservation on film. I would say yes, because there's a vested interest in Hollywood to preserve on film, and they see that as an asset. And so I think definitely film will be around for for past 10 years.
Well, I think I guess the question there is, for preservation purposes for Hollywood, actually how much film is needed for that, and how much film needs to run through a production line in a modern coding facility to make it worthwhile them doing it. And I'm not sure that those two numbers work out.
Well, I would say that, one last question, Alice, I would just say, instead of being, there'll be 2 vendors, the film would be down to 1.
Well, that'd be panicking.
We have.
The frightening thing about that is that when I spoke to the person who produces or whose processes our E6 film, first thing he said was, well, don't forget, Fuji almost follows suit with Kodak. When Kodak discontinues a product, Fuji isn't far behind discontinuing the same product, even though they're the last person standing for that product.
I have a comment on sort of gathering resource, because I think the main advantage in the art world with having multi-edition works is that commonly we sort of all work separately in trying to strike prints with the right lighting, to work with those labs, with the specialists, to sort of inherit a little bit of their knowledge and their approach. The same for slides. And I think whenever somebody sort of runs in production, there should be enough cash flow in order to also offer the very same service to the other edition holders, so that gradually there will be a large pile-up of material that can go in cold storage, rather than every single one of the institutions trying to come up with their own way of dealing with it. And I think currently we don't really see enough of those sort of global corporations that sort of strike united forces and make things happen, which often obviously is a resource implication, but you could bring costs down so much by just going times 20, times 50, or times 100 during the production process.
Jeff, do you want to comment on that, like economies of scale, I suppose?
There isn't much with Doug. So it's all one price, you know? It doesn't really make, I mean, it's different than normal duping where you got a discount on quantity, if that's what you mean. It doesn't, we don't really, it's cost the same for Doug to make a couple or more.
It's too manual when you need to manually cut up 8x10 sheets of film and mount them. You don't have automated equipment anymore that can do that, or even semi-automated equipment. You've got a good technician who's committed to doing that. Yes, exactly. Right. And you make it easier for them by putting score lines on the image so that they can see where to cut, but it's still handwork.
I guess another part of it is the people, and training, and people in the pipeline, having people in the pipeline behind this group. Is there another group that even have the opportunities to learn, what Janice does with more recently? Is that happening? Maybe Mona can comment on that too, but go ahead. Just in terms of, film, school, and what's being taught, what are kids learning?
Well, certainly, it's definitely the case, because Jeff is an example. The archivist that's working for me is another example. That NYU has this MIA program that trains students in the art of media conservation, and so their work under me, they work under Janice, they work under all these people to learn the talents and skills that we've acquired for all these years to pass it on to the next generation. So as long as there's students and programs that are interested in doing that, and people that say, yes, I want to take you under my wing, it will happen.
And also the information is recorded, it's available. None of this is a secret, how we do these things. And your presentation points out the fact that, digitally you can use a different film. That's very important. You can use a film that is not necessarily designed for the original purpose, for the purpose you're trying to use it for. And so that's right there, that's kind of a glimmer of light. But the bottom line is, with this hysteria, which I mentioned before, if we abandon film for digital, that'll be the end of film. That's what's going to kill it. That'll be the last nail in the coffin. And that's what I'm trying to battle, because, you know, digital, it has no track record. I have Edison original nitrate prints from 1893 that are just fine. Okay, that's 120 years old. In fact, I think, didn't we bring some pieces? Maybe we didn't. But this is the point. You know, how do you know you're going to have these digital files in 120 years? Or you may have them, but you can't read them. You know, archivists want to see an image because they know that's safe. It's safe to have an image that you can see with your eyes.
Yeah, I think that's a strange reversal on what's going on now, in that we have the move to move everything to digital is actually a move to be running towards a digital cliff where one day it's there and the next day it's not. And we know how to deal with film. We know how to store film. We know how it degrades. We know everything about it. We've been studying it for years. And you know, another disappointing thing for us is that we output for institutions that are getting born digital still pictures that want real security for those images, and they send us those files and we output them to film for preservation. And now we can't do that, or soon we won't be able to do that. And it's a real sadness.
Mona, you had something?
Well, I had my original thought was, and I guess it's in agreeing with the person who was speaking back there, Tina, is that you know, I don't, and I hope I don't sound, I love museums, and I don't want to sound anti-museum here, but it does seem like it sort of reminds me of the situation with video, in that all the different museums seem to be assuming that those resources for the work is still going to be there outside there, was actually we live, you know, together in this kind of ecology. So that unless there is, and it maybe has something to do with the fact that museums collect these individual objects, and you know, conservation is very different than archival conservation. But I mean, I think in terms of extending the period of time in which we can access film, I think that it really makes a difference to be able to band together and say, and show the producers of film that the manufacturers of film, that there actually is a market. Because I think if everybody just does their own thing in their own institutions and kind of goes out and tries to find the film lab, they are disappearing like crazy out there. So that's one thing. But and we don't teach in the MEAP program, you know, how to actually process film. We teach about how to inspect film and how to repair film and how to send it to a lab. So that we won't be producing people who can actually process film. And we haven't been so far anyway. And just one more thing is that, I mean, I think this year I learned a lot because we brought in some people to talk about digital cinema packages, and which are, you know, the film works that are being created digitally, and a lot of the theaters are having to go digital and not being able to project anymore film. So that is also an impact, is the theatrical releases are forcing theaters to give up on projection, analog projection. So that's also a factor. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to try to learn about, and I would say that because of that, there are, you know, there's more talk about scanning of individual frames and you know, storing things that way, and that was originally an intermediate process, and now it's becoming a storage, you know, a kind of permanent storage process. There's the digital cinema packages, there's the scanning, and there's data cine, which people are doing. And so I think that it would be great if we had a follow-up that was about the processes that people are actually using. because I think that from that would be very instructive. I'm going to argue, you know, I mean, there's like, if you get on the EMEA listserv, you know, you can go, I mean, there's just raging debates about film versus digital, and it's just not, they're both here, and they're both part of the equation. So I think it's considering really looking at the different communities and how they are moving to, you know, what they're doing in terms of what preservation, the definition of preservation is evolving. And but I think that we can't sit in our individual institutions and say, now I'm going to go worry about, you know, get this film duplicated, and now I'm going to go look for a lab. That's not going to work in 10 years. I don't believe. But
I'd like to comment on that. I don't think that what theaters use for projection has anything to do with archives. You know, the studios, like Maurice was saying, the major studios are still shooting 35mm film or Super 16mm film. And the access medium is DCP on the screen in the theater, but it's all backed up on film, and that's what they still believe in.
the major film archives are starting to collect DCPs, not film.
Well, that's fine, you know. And you know, the other problem for the archives is that they have a lot of archives have a lot of film, and they are being asked to provide DCP files for external use, and that's a real expensive proposition, unfortunately, at the moment, and it's a big dilemma for everyone. But I have no problem, I mean, and 20 years ago I wouldn't have said this, but I have absolutely no problem with digital projection. I think it's actually better than film in many respects, and it's access. It's like making a Betacam, you know, for distribution or DVDs, or it's an access medium, just like a DCP file is in a theater. But we're talking about preservation here. You know, it's a whole different issue.
You're saying motion picture films shot digitally, the industry knows, okay, we need to preserve this digital
Well, no, we're talking
movie.
about films that are acquired. The major film.
But so they shoot digital, but they still need to preserve this, and the industry puts that back onto film to preserve that file, right? That's a preservation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and that is a 35mm stock,
Mhm.
and I think there's a much more market in that than the random few people who are still buying slide or picture film.
But it's.
I think that has an impact on, you know, Fuji still making film, right? Because there's an industry.
We're just in a transitional period. You know, everything's in flux. I think the crash, you know, everything. It's just, you know, we get crash after crash and budget cut after budget cut, and it just wiped out 72 stock for us, you know.
And Doug relies on 8x10 film, and how much longer? I mean, who's shooting 8x10? So.
Apparently nobody. You know, again, I think the whole issue keeps coming up. It's all about economies of scale. I don't know how many labs are doing film output of motion pictures, digital to film for preservation. And there's a company in Calgary, I believe, and they do a lot. They do a lot, but a lot of it's on black and white separations, I believe. So that's not going to help the color film industry. If a lot of preservation is on color separation film or black and white, you know, tricolor
still
sets.
acquiring on color neg.
Yeah.
You know, and for years, Kodak kept saying that they every year they were selling more and more negative. I'm sure that's not true now.
Yeah.
But it was shocking. You know, when everyone said, "Well, film's going to end," well, Kodak said, "Well, but people are still using negative." You know?
Yeah.
So, and they still are now.
Good.
You know.
Actually, really sorry.
And, you know, as far as color film goes, you know, Kodak has developed color film to just a phenomenal. phenomenal level. You know, the quality of Kodak film, and I'm not, you know, I am plugging them. I mean, the intermediate stocks that they have now are just beyond comprehension. They're so good, and I don't see those disappearing anytime soon.
I wanted to add actually to what you were saying. I was at the Society of Photographic Education conference in San Francisco last month. Kodak, AGFA, and Fuji were all there. Of course, it's talking about still photography, not moving image, but all three of them were not talking about any sort of end to the production of still film. And it seems to me that that economy has sort of stabilized. And I wonder what you guys think about the possibility of the individual being able to take a picture from the camera to a print by a person's self without needing a lab. What kind of factor that might be in the life of film?
I'm not sure. Can you qualify that a little better?
Oh, sure.
What are you asking?
The question is, do you think that there might be a factor of the production of still image versus moving image? An individual can take a still image from camera to print in their bathroom, whereas moving image, you kind of need a lab.
You're talking about acquiring in film a still image on film or digitally?
Producing a still image is much easier than it is to produce a moving image, to produce a film.
Okay, but your acquisition, are you talking originally acquiring the image on film in the camera, or are you talking a digital camera? That's the part I didn't.
Oh, film, analog.
Okay.
Yes.
And so...
It just seems to me that there's a factor that hasn't been discussed, which is that an individual person can take analog film from their camera and develop it in their bathroom and print a print in their bathroom, whereas that's not as easy to do in moving image. And the still industry has kind of lost its commercial backing, so it's kind of surviving now on just individuals and smaller institutions working through it, it seems to me. So if that doesn't make any sense, we can just move on.
Well, there are filmmakers that do that in the bathroom, and Jean is one of them.
Yeah, I think there's the crazy people do that with the moving image, you know? And on that note, us crazy people are also still in the labs. Like, I'm considered a young person in this industry, and there are other young people in labs. So just to go back to that question, and you know, there at Cinema Arts a couple weeks ago, there was a tour coming through from Eastman House, and a number of the students, you know, would have loved to work there, and were jealous that I just moved from New York City to go live in the woods to work there. And I moved from San Francisco when I worked at Monaco to go work at Cineric in New York, and I moved there just for the job because I'm crazy. And I just moved to the woods in Pennsylvania for the job because I'm crazy, you know? So there are some crazy people, young people, doing this who are going to do it, and there's crazy filmmakers doing this who are going to do it and find a way to do it. There are crazy brilliant lab technicians who have been around forever who are not going anywhere, you know? And so there are these crazy people who are really determined, and some of us are like filmmakers and lab technicians all in one, or like brilliant archivists and lab technicians all in one. And so, I mean, some of us are really maybe so determined that, you know, we're arguing for this crazy side of it, and we really think it's gonna be possible, and maybe some of us are just seeing the death of film already, but I just don't think it's there yet. And certainly, just to answer, you know, in the young person, where are these people, in that sort of question, like, if you go to the labs, there are like crazy, determined young people in them.
And getting back to your point about negative in the camera, you know, this is what we're talking about. Kodak is they're almost still making camera negative, and it's going to be able to be processed for a long time, whether you do it in your bathtub or you do it at a lab. You know, if even small quantities can be run through a major motion picture processing machine. You know, that was done for years. You know, you can put it in a camera and shoot a 5-foot roll of film, and they just attach it all together and run it through what they call a long film processor, which is what you know, motion picture negative goes through. And that's what's not disappearing, and there's no reason we can't use that negative for duplicating films. I could have done Ricardo's film on a camera negative rather than 72. It's an option, and it probably would work just as well.
Well,
Very to the point, like after a whole day of presentations about avoiding or averting, you know, shutdown in certain stocks, sectors, formats, I have a very specific question for Kate. Do you conceive or foresee the Tate being willing to kind of migrate 16 material artists' film installations to 35 millimeter if that kind of ends up as the last resort, or do you see there not being a will there and everything just going digital? Do you have anything to say to this?
Yes. I think
That's it. That's the answer. Yes.
yes. I think, I mean, every artist is different. Tasta Dean never digitise over her dead body. Other artists, as we saw earlier today, are saying they're being kind of ambivalent about whether it can be shown as film or video. And I think if the film is the crucial bit, I definitely think if 16 dies and 35 stays around longer, yeah, absolutely, move to 35 millimeter. I mean, hopefully the artists will still be around so we can have that discussion with them. Maybe for some artists, the 16 millimeter is crucial to the conception of the work, so it's not going to work on 35. Just like the D1Z1, it's crucial that that's on 35 millimeter, it's not going to work on 16. But yeah, absolutely, I think there's all those kind of things out there that will take it. And I think...
But you're waiting for it. You're not now, you know, asking artists, hey, maybe we'll get
No, not directly. When we do get to talk to the artists in person, you know, we'll say, so, you know, at some point you're going to go under a bus. And, you know, what are the crucial things to you for this artwork? What can change and what can't change? And that's why it's so important to understand how the work was made and conceptually why it was made in a particular way, to then help those decisions into the future. And I think some artists, they'd want to like make a time capsule. Tacita said this herself, but you know, where you kind of write down your thoughts about what you think could be done, or some, you know, maybe you could digitize it. But if they start saying that now, some places they'll just digitize it and they'll show it, and that then completely stops what the work is. And then if we're trying to support an industry and show work as film and keep it as the medium, that kind of... So I think it's very difficult to say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to go. But I think we can see ways through, and you kind of have to let it roll a bit. But I think for me and the Tate and Tina, one of the important things is we show the work as film and we educate people about film. And, you know, digital's great. Lots of great digital works out there, and that's completely valid as well. But there's a reason why somebody chose film, keep showing it as film, and maybe we'll just not show it in the same way. We won't show it looping in a gallery for 3 months. We'll show it again as a performance piece as it was in the 70s or something like that. You know, it'll be like a one-off thing and it'll be a bit scratched. But, you know, the great thing is we can put it in a cold store. It's not going to fall off a hard drive.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're taking it back to sort of the institutional perspective that Jeffrey was getting at, and I think that's really important to think about, because if the question is, will we be able to do these things again in 10 years, my answer might be, I think so, but if you're working for an institution, your responsibility is more to say, I have to assume no in order to really properly care for this work. I think that may be an institution's more valid way of looking at it, and so what does that mean? And I think it does mean in really practical ways, because I do believe that sometimes there is a simple solution to a complicated problem. Not the solution, but there is a simple solution, which is, as Jeffrey mentioned, stockpiling, which has the twin virtues of preparing for the future and supporting an industry, and also beginning, like you were saying, to change your perceptions of what film exhibition is for and what the film is going to look like. You know, standard practice being taking those 3-week run prints and discarding them and, bandsawing them. That time has passed. That you're going to be hanging on to the print that you have, and having to do a lot more contextualizing. If that's the print you have, that may be an institutional question more than an industry question. But
as a paper conservator, I have lots of things in our collection that can't get shown very often, and we say no because they're really overexposed, they're really light sensitive. I would hate for it to come to that, but it may. I think that's a possibility.
I've got a question. Maybe it's for the people who are employed by institutions, collecting institutions. I mean, it seems it seems very clear that the cultural value of film-based works is only increasing. And I'm wondering if these challenges that we're talking about, has that had any impact on the acquisition strategy or acquisitions at your institution? In other words, as the cultural value increases, the responsibility of a collecting institution should be to aggressively collect. But since the preservation picture is a bit turbulent, maybe there's some inertia there. And I'm just wondering if the three of you have any comments on that.
We've just acquired 3 slide pieces in the last couple of years. Joanna and I just looked at one 2 days ago that they were considering. The curator was like, are you sure it's going to be all right if we do this? But, this is what we should do, is figure this out. I don't think we should ever try to stop this or slow it, We want to try to figure out solutions.
I think at the Tate what we are finding is that a very large amount of slide works from the 70s has come back to the market, where you already feel that the artists are anxious about the preservation of those works, and that also the galleries don't any longer know how to deal with them, and that they sort of have that big hope in the museum's organization that they're going to find a way in order to keep those works going. And I just wanted to throw another thought in the discussion, is to perhaps also look into the linkage between stills photography film and motion picture, and whether the experts in the field actually think that they're being made in the same factory or also coming off one and the same machine. As often the emulsions that are being used are actually one and the same, and it's only the packaging and the perforations that differ, and whether that may already trigger the moment when we know if motion picture goes, then still photography is going to go pretty much at the same point, and what the sort of thoughts behind that theory are.
What do you think? Well, I think, still photography, I think you need to, and it's probably implied by your question. I mean, there's the black and white, and I think there is a sustainable model in a kind of craft sense, really small sense of sustaining that. You can make your own films, you can make your own negatives, you can make your own paper for black and white. For color, I think it becomes, that's where we really get into trouble in terms of coating the stock, initially manufacturing it, processing it, having the chemistry, the whole industry to sustain that. Does that sort of track with what you were thinking? Or?
The same stock, right? In parts? Yeah, right.
That the specialist or the consumer representatives at Kodak for stills photography would pretty much agree to that principle, and the same thing on the motion picture side, because also in the way how both of those products are being dealt with, there seems to be no relation in order to give you the full picture.
Well, I think that's very true. I think they're very opaque. But I think, if I understood your comment initially, you were asking whether or not still photography products were made in the same coating alleys, the same buildings as motion pictures.
Yeah.
And I believe that they are.
Yeah.
So that unfortunately when they begin to discontinue still photographic materials, they're at the same time then discontinuing the volume that's going through that coating alley. Which puts more pressure on the motion picture side to sustain it.
But in principle, analog photography film is only still available because motion picture is bringing in the revenue in order to keep that going.
I believe that's the case, yes. Oh, God.
No, this is getting back to my tour at Kodak. I mean, basically, the implication was when the guy was giving me the tour was that as soon as the big market dries up, which is not shooting on film, it's the distribution. I mean, if you think about how many prints that have to go to all these different theaters, that's potentially millions of miles of film. Once that distribution system breaks down, then the whole thing
is gone.
Now that was from a Kodak perspective. One individual was giving me the tour. But I think that actually makes, I mean, we're talking about a bankrupt company here. I mean, selling their IP as quickly and as aggressively as they possibly can. So I don't think 10 years ago we could have seen that coming, and I don't think 10 years forward we really know what we're in for either, necessarily. But I don't want to end this on a sort of gloom and doom, like no. So I kind of want to get back to this idea, and we don't have much time. We have very little time. But I want to get back to the idea of the cultural relevance of film-based works. And I do believe that it is increasing, and I do believe that institutions have an obligation to reflect that increased value and collect. And I want to maybe just get your view on that and how that is playing out.
Yeah, I completely agree that their sort of cultural prominence and cultural value is increasing, and value is critical. And let's be blunt, value both in terms of culture and in terms of money. As the sort of visibility of this issue and these works increase, I do think that it becomes easier within an institution to argue for the necessary expenditures to keep these works alive, particularly as, again, frankly, their financial value increases for a new acquisition in particular. It becomes easier to argue for the sort of preventive maintenance, I guess, that Jeffrey is arguing for, to say, I need 50 exhibition copies of this work for exhibitions that I don't know when they will ever happen. That can be difficult, but as the cultural value of these things increases, and as the wider knowledge of the issues they face increases, I do think it becomes a bit easier to advocate for better strategic planning for the long term.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, Tate acquired 14 film-based works last year, and they acquire about 40 time-based media works a year. So it's quite a large percentage, and they're coming in thick and fast this year as well. And I had a curator just calling me about more slide-based artworks and what does that mean? Can we buy it? Oh my God, and it's like, well, let's talk to the artist, let's find out what's going on. So I'm not directly involved in those decisions, those are curatorial decisions sort of above, but the fact that they're buying up all these 1970s kind of British performance sort of seminal works, that's all coming into kind of the museum kind of world. I think clearly there is this really big push, and it's kind of a revival in a way, in that sense.
So we should probably wrap it up. I think this was an amazing day of presentations, and I want to thank everyone who participated, everyone who came, everyone who gave a presentation, everyone who supported this, FAIC, the Hirshhorn, Smithsonian Archives, Sven, EMG. So fantastic, looking forward to tomorrow.